Hello, this is Scottish Independence Podcast episode 101, and this time I caught up with Robin McAlpine to see what's been happening with the Common Weal since the referendum. So we did that, but we also got onto a more general discussion about what's changed and what hasn't changed in the time since the referendum, and both of them are equally important. So yeah, there's lots to get your teeth into in this one. We'll just go straight to the conversation, and I'll have a wee word with you at the end. Hi Robin, how's it going?
It's going extremely well.
There's been quite a lot happened since we met in George Square. Was it on the day of the vote or the day before the vote?
The night before. It was the night before the votes, and I was standing, looking around and thinking, my God, politics in Scotland didn't used to be like this. When I heard your familiar tones, and yeah, the amount of things that have happened since then, it's hard to even credit how much has happened.
You were on crutches, I remember.
No, I was my walk stick. I had a bad car accident. I'll tell you this, and I don't know if it'll make it into the final one. I had a bad car accident. A guy fell asleep at the wheel and came over a blind hill and drove straight into me. And it was 100 mile an hour. I was doing 50, he was doing 50. And I was in the car for an hour and a half before they cut me out. And my brain, the woman came, the people behind me were nurses in the car behind. And so they were in there keeping me talking, doing all the stuff that you're supposed to do. And they asked me every question, what do you do? Where do you come from? Anything to keep me going. I could answer every question fine, apart from one. And that question was, what were you doing last night? And hard as I was thinking, my brain was thinking, what was I doing last night? And I couldn't remember. It was only hours later that I realised that actually what I'd been doing the night before was watching Scotland get knocked out in the 98 World Cup final by Morocco. But it just shows what a fabulous job the brain does at suppressing trauma.
Yeah, that's why the new Labour leader's been passing me by, basically.
That's not traumatic, that's just pitiful. Completely different thing. But no, the walking stick is something that I've been using for years nowadays whenever I'm trying to get about. So it wasn't a specific injury, it was just my normal.
Sorry, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's okay.
So the Common Weal has been certainly moving along with a number of things. There's going to be another guest on the show very soon to talk about the media side of it. But I know that there's been Common Weal groups set up and meetings going on. Would you like to explain what's the philosophy behind it, but then also what is happening on the ground at these meetings and where they're going on?
Well, I mean, let me give you the big picture thing. It seemed to a lot of us that there was this amazing potential for change after the yes vote, after the referendum. After we didn't get the yes vote, there was no change in the desire for people to see some real progress in Scotland. But I mean, I'm quite a cynical old hack at this stuff. And the referendum was a period in which we did so much of it completely voluntarism, without much infrastructure, and people just worked extremely hard. Now that can't sustain itself indefinitely. You need to have some sort of structure, some sort of support for things if you want to make these kind of social movements really effective and lasting and ongoing. So what we did was with Common Weal was we would just look to see what sorts of things did it become clear that we needed to change in Scotland. So among them was the media. And I think Michael's coming on to talk about Common Space. But we've now got an editor and 4 journalists working every day to produce high quality, original investigative news. And that was one of the things that we needed, was a better place for news, for opinion, for debate, for discussion, to bring things together. But we also need a structure for organising. So what we're doing as well with Common Space is, and I think it's looking like it's going to be early March at the moment, it's got a full social media element to it as well. So, my overseas relatives have probably had just about enough of sharing infographics about Scottish monetary policy with them when all they really want to see is the grand wains. So Facebook cannot be the only organising place for this movement. So we've created this a social media function which should help people not only to do all that kind of campaign work, but to tie them into new functions. So we've got a parliamentary lobbyist who's 3 days in the Parliament. We've got a graphic designer employed who helps to make sure that everything is looking good, is well presented. We've got a policy unit, and it's getting all this facility, all this capacity, and linking it to people in individual campaigns, which is a large part of what we're trying to do. So that's the Common Space bit. But we've also got the straightforward policy unit stuff. We're never going to change Scotland just by wishing it so. If we want to have real change, real policy change, We've got to take workable, implementable proposals to politicians, to government, and persuade them that that is what Scotland's future is. So we're very much not the anti-organisation complaining about this, anti-that, opposing the other. What we want to try and do is put together a really strong portfolio of policy proposals for 2016 to 2020 in Holyrood, and get them developed up into a stage that they're ready to be implemented, real working policies. So we've got 2 people in a policy unit headed by Peter McCall who are working on that full agenda. And we've got the lobbyist, and we've got Common Print, which is a publishing arm. We're about to publish our first book, which is it's the first comprehensive history of the anti-World War I movement in Scotland. So, I mean, it's really interesting, some of the stuff in that. So we've got that publishing arm as well. But the other part of the referendum which we were keen to keep going was local activism. And, you know, all the Yes groups had a really strong local focus, and they got people involved. They got people really active. The worry, well, for me personally, was if you took away that one focus, would they have a structure which made them feel like they could keep getting involved? Now, some groups have been great. Women for India have got local groups all over Scotland, and they've been very impressive in keeping that kind of activity and momentum going. And the Radical Independence Campaign, they've got a lot of local groups as well, which are keeping activity going. But what we did was we held we called it a national tour. We did 38 public meetings across Scotland and just invited anyone who was interested to come in and say, well, are you interested in setting up a local Common Weal group? What do you want to do with it? What are the issues? How would you want it to work? What support do you want from us? And at the time of counting, I think we've got 49 local groups going. It is really fascinating because some of them are doing very practical things. So one group is talking to the Forestry Commission about being able to get access to naturally fallen wood, which they're going to prepare up and hopefully going to prepare a fuel bank for rural poverty and rural communities so they can get access to fuel. And other people are looking at setting up a food bank. So there's really practical stuff. Or there's another group who've been doing, in effect, sort of book groups, political education, which have been encouraging people to come in. And they were working for a while, taking a chapter out the Common Weal book each, I think it's a fortnight. They all read it, they get together, and they use that as a springboard for talking about political activity, political education. Or there was the Dunoon group were very active in the Castle Toward campaign locally. My local South Lanarkshire group, we met 2 weeks ago, and we're talking about all sorts of things to do with the failure to plan the town centres in South Lanarkshire in ways which are, you know, amenable, and the death of town centres. And what's really interesting is everybody is going their own direction with it. And for a fraction of a second, I thought, oh God, is this dangerous? If we've got nearly 50 local groups doing whatever it is that they want to do, and is there reputational risk? What happens if people get things wrong? And quite quickly, I've just come to feel that, to hell with it. This is a different era now. And if we've got lots of local groups doing their own thing, no central control, you know, following their own route, well, that's good. And if people make a mistake, yeah, that's fine. That's good too. Better to make a mistake than make nothing.
Yeah, at least they're trying to do something.
Well, they are trying to do something. And people have been kind of saying, what is a Common Weal local group? And I say a Common Weal local group is an excuse. Nothing more than that. It's an excuse to do things locally. And whatever it is that you think is needing done in your area, whether it's taking national campaigns locally, because there's a lot of the local groups that are doing fracking and T-tip stuff, or whether it's a frustration at your local authorities' lack of responsiveness and a desire to really do some campaigning to change it, whatever it is, whatever your excuse, then great. It's an excuse for people to get together and talk about what they want to change. So we're going to be, Common Space is going to be the place where we do a lot of our local groups organising, and the big next step is every Common Weal group will have its own group on Common Space, and it's getting them to learn from each other now. So when they've seen, I mean, Perth and Kinross have got a wonderful weekend-long festival of Common Weal happening in April. And some of the events they've got lined up for that are great. And what I think is really important is to get all the other local groups seeing what each other are doing, learning for good examples of what's been happening and replicating it. And I think that'll be a very interesting experiment in genuine grassroots development of, you know, national campaigns and local things.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very, I don't want to say uncontrolled, but there's a there's not really centralised control apart from in some of the things with the policy unit, but then people are able to agree with that or disagree with that as they wish. But the interesting thing about the policy unit there, that you come back, actually reminded me of something else. Naomi Klein talking about Milton Friedman and disaster capitalism in a way. And I'll get round to, you might think this is a strange comparison, but in a very famous lecture she made about this, she talked about whenever there's a problem, governments tend to run around like a headless chicken and pick up the first plan that's there that someone shoves in their hand. It's about what ideas are lying around to be used. And at the moment, all we've ever had for a long, long time is those right-wing, neoliberal, free market ideas that are ready. In certain cases, the crisis is manufactured, and then there's the solution pushed in their face. Is part of the idea with the policy unit to have an alternative, workable solution there on the table the next time something comes up?
The whole idea is to do that. If you look at what we tended to do in the left, whenever the left thinks it's time for serious political change, it goes away and it sets up a political party. When the political right wants to see political change, it goes and it sets up a think tank, or it puts its money into developing and pushing specific ideas and proposals. And everything that I've done since I left full-time work has been about that. Well, when I say full-time work, I mean being employed by somebody else. It's all been about that. It's been about saying, why don't we learn what works? Why don't we realise that what they do works? That's why they're winning. And another thing that I think is really important to understand is no big political thinking comes from political parties. Now, that's not a criticism. That's just the nature of things. Political parties are far too busy in the nuts and bolts of politics to do the big thinking stuff, certainly as a general rule. So Thatcher didn't invent Thatcherism. The Adam Smith Institute invented Thatcherism.
And not Adam Smith, I'd like to point out.
No, Adam Smith Institute. And it was the Chicago school that invented Reaganomics, not Reagan. Third way politics, it was a whole bunch of think tanks round about the Democratic Party. It wasn't Bill Clinton who invented it, and so on and so on. So what you find is that the really big changes in ideas and thinking and practice, they don't come from political parties. And we've had a long period now where we've not had good, properly worked out, properly thought through and popular ideas that have come from the political left. Now, if you don't put something on the table, you can hardly complain that people pick up what is on the table. So if the only proposal that is out there is for the privatisation of X or Y or Z, and all you do is march, all you do is come in, I'm not against, by any manner of means, protest. That's an incredibly important part of what we've done, but it's not sufficient. It is not enough to protest against what you don't like. You have to build the proposals for what you do like. And I mean, you're absolutely right. We try not to be too controlled in the centre. And this kind of dispersed activity thing that's been happening in Common Weal is great. But at the same time, you do have to recognise that if someone has to work out what is the return rate on an 8-year bond for a large-scale house building programme, you need to sit down and do the work. And that's why, you know, we took a little bit of an experiment before at crowdsourced policy, and it really only takes you so far, because the initial idea is fine, but then you have to test it and work it up and build it and look at legality and look at costings and all this kind of stuff. And that takes specific skill sets and dedications of time and effort. So yeah, that's what the policy unit's for. I've said this so many times. The best way to change things is through ideas. Ideas come first. The concept of something, the belief that something can be done, can be different, is how change starts. And if we create the ideas that make people believe that change is possible, then they'll start to support it. And incidentally, that's the lesson of the referendum campaign. And when it started off, 2 years to go before the vote, you wouldn't particularly have said that Scotland was looking massively radical. In fact, I remind people with 18 months to go, a lot of people were describing the campaign as lackluster, uninspiring, devoid of big ideas. And it was that really stimulated people to create those ideas. And it was as those ideas were created, it was as these visions of a future that were different were created and articulated, that more and more people were pulled in and more people started to believe, and it had a self-reinforcing effect.
I don't think it's just a case of believing. Once more and more people get involved in it, then there are people who know how to do it, or at least know how to do part of it, and then when they come together and work together, you work out one part of it, I'll work out another part of it, and that's how the actual thing becomes a reality. There's a stage after the idea and then the belief. Then people actually start to work on, like, how can we do it? I mean, you could even take that with